Hey, this is John from Alloy 211. Today's video is on the Iver Johnson Safety Hammerless Automatic Double Action Revolver. It was produced from 1894 until 1941 in 2 different frame sizes and 4 different calibers. By the time production ceased in 1941, they had produced 14 million of these firearms, which kind of leads into one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, because this is definitely a type of firearm you'll encounter on the used market. And I think that this is also well characterized by the fact that these 2 other revolvers that are in a very similar pattern, and if you just gave a casual glance to, you would think could all be made by the same manufacturer, are actually made by 2 different manufacturers just around the same time period. So if this one firearm, granted made in 2 different frame sizes and 4 other calibers, was made to the point of 14 million, just imagine how many were made of these. Now this is a Harrington and Richardson's. Made probably around 1913. I'm not going to get into either one of these guns too much, as I plan on doing videos just on these guns at some point in time. And this is a Hopkins & Allen 1901 4-hand model. So I don't know for sure when this one was produced, but at some point after 1901. Now this Iver Johnson here in the center, it was a little harder. It's a little harder to nail down exactly what it is, but you can tell by the features and the grips and where the serial number is that it is most likely an Iver Johnson. Now, for example, the Harrington and Richardson here is clearly marked on the top strap as to what it is. So, and on the side it's got the caliber marking and such. So that makes it a little easier, and it has a broken grip as well. It's something I need to replace. That makes it pretty easy to identify. And the Hopkins & Allen, as you can see, the grip is an H and A. Also, this firearm is kind of an illusion because it's really not got any pieces in it. It's in pieces, and I will explain as to why that is in a bit. Anyway, on the top of this, you can see top strap says 4-hand model 1901 Hopkins & Allen. You can see it's clearly marked. Whereas our Iver Johnson, which was kindly lent to me from a coworker, our Iver Johnson has no discernible markings anywhere on the firearm really. No outward serial numbers, no patent dates, no manufacturer's name. Also, no front sight, as you can see. This has had a relatively useful life, I would say, especially for a firearm like this, given that I don't really think they're ever intended to be used a whole lot. Now, there are a couple ways that you can identify this as probably an Iver Johnson. One is the grip, because it has the owl head towards the barrel like that, and that is an Iver Johnson grip. Another is the style of lock. This also kind of helps us date it because this is a single lock, and so I mean that helps to identify as to what it is and around the time period it's probably made, because from what I was reading, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this grip off. There you go. As you can see, it's just taking the grip screw out and then gently, very gently with these grips, as they are old and they do like to break. But then as well, because the serial number is in the area that it should be for an Iver Johnson. Now, from what I was reading, you can't necessarily use the serial number to date it. You can to a certain extent, but then it gets kind of confusing. From what I was reading, the people who were definitely more experts on the subject than I am said that you really can't use that as a reliable dating tool. And I don't know exactly the particulars behind that. I know that there's a book out there on these firearms. I did not purchase it to make a video about it, but if you go and look, I'm sure you'll find it and you'll see it. And if you're really interested, you can buy it yourself and look it up. Like I said, though, one of the features is this trigger, which if you look at the trigger, it may look familiar to you on a much more modern firearm, not a firearm first produced in 1894, which is this trigger safety. Now, if you take and you push on the trigger without pushing on the safety, it cannot move. Well, let me let go of the cylinder so you can see it is not me. Now, when you push in on the safety, and I have to be honest, for the first couple days that I had this before I did the video on it, I didn't pull it hard enough to pull the trigger because I didn't want to break it, because it's not my firearm. But if you pull it and it's hard, with that depressed, it will cycle. Now, that's another feature. Once I realized how hard that trigger pull was, I really thought, you know, I really think that this is the nicest of these three firearms. And I just thought, you know, the trigger pull on this is so much better. And you look at the machining, say on the cylinder here, and the cylinder stops just look a lot nicer. The finish on it is a lot nicer, other than, again, broken grip, but that's not their fault. Anyway, I guess I shouldn't pick favorites of cheap pocket turn of the 20th century 32 Smith & Wesson short revolvers. Anyway, another distinct feature of this to show it's an Iver Johnson is this humpback here. And the modern gun that has the trigger safety like that, I guess, I bet you've probably figured it out by now, is the Glock, which is what we always associate that, I won't say always, as there are a couple of other firearms that have them, but I would say this is the firearm that's most closely associated with that style of trigger safety. You know, it's not the only one, but it's definitely the most common or most well known. And most people that have these, I really doubt would think that a 100-year-old plus revolver had it before that. You know, that seems, you know, very modern to them, and it's not really so modern at all. And that's pretty cool, well, in my opinion. Now, another way that you can kind of date this revolver, since the serial number is not 100% reliable, from what I was reading, prior to 32 Smith & Wesson short becoming smokeless, it was black powder. And the ones, the Iver Johnsons like this that were designed for black powder, have 2 pins above the trigger guard in the frame, and they have the single lock. And once the Smith & Wesson short had been changed to a smokeless powder loading, they changed the firearm as well. And I'm not going to get into the minutia of the changes in these firearms because they actually have quite a few over time. This is just kind of a rough overview of what it is. Like a lot of my videos, you know, if you want to look into it more in depthly, or if you have more knowledge on the subject, I strongly encourage you to comment below, because I find it really interesting to learn more from the people who watch the videos. Anyway, 32 Smith & Wesson short, again, was originally black powder cartridge. These two firearms, this one I know for sure, given it was made in 1913, and I'm relatively sure that this one was also designed more for the smokeless loading of the 32 Smith & Wesson short, as it has a double lock, much as this one, and much as this would later have. And it just seems to be a better quality overall, I guess, than the materials used. Like you were maybe intended to make it stronger. I don't know for sure. That's all speculation, I guess, on my part. But from what I was reading, it is kind of important to, if you do have one of these firearms, to make sure you're shooting the black powder loads out of it. Or don't want to necessarily say that. From what I've read, and people who shoot these, the black powder variants, if you shoot the smokeless 32 Smith & Wesson short in them over time, it does tend to wear them out more. And given that these firearms were not intended really to be shot a lot, they were intended to be your backup. Maybe you shoot it enough to be familiar with it, but you're not taking this out in target shooting. I'm going to try to get a good shot of this on camera. And this is kind of what I meant about some of what seemed like lesser materials. As if you look here, all of the teeth on this are worn out. Although this does still spin the cylinder, there's no way I would think that this is in time. And it really needs a qualified gunsmith to probably take a look at it. I mean, I can do some things, but I would not be confident in that because I just don't have the expertise to do that. And I think you really should take that to someone with the expertise. I mean, you don't want your cylinder to be, say, there and fire. It's not quite aligned with the barrel. Maybe that's too far, but you get what I mean. Anyway, that is really worn out. You know, these weren't intended to be shot a lot, so it kind of makes you wonder what kind of forces and what kind of stresses are put on it when you use smokeless powder. Now, another thing that I have to bring up, and it's the reason as to why this firearm is in pieces, and that's when I first acquired these two firearms. I was in my early 20s, and I understood ballistics to a certain extent, and I understood firearms. I'd been shooting since I was a child, and so I felt I had a pretty good handle on these things. And when I acquired these, I didn't really appreciate what cartridge case pressure. And so I looked and I saw that 32 Smith & Wesson short is really hard to find. And what's really easy to find is 32 ACP. And I checked it out, and dimensionally, it's a similar round. So I thought, okay, well, you can try that. What I didn't realize is the vast difference in PSI between a 32 ACP and a 32 Smith & Wesson short. Now, granted, like I said, dimensionally, they are very similar. But pressure-wise, they are vastly different. From what I was reading, the pressure load of a 32 Smith & Wesson short 85 grain bullet should be between 9,500 psi and 15,000. There wasn't really a good clear-cut number on it, but somewhere between 9,500 and 15,000 psi max case pressure. So say that's a rough average of 12,000 psi. Now the SAMI rated psi of a 32 ACP 71 grain bullet is 20,500 psi. So even if you took the highest possible pressure rating for this firearm, which is probably above this firearm, as this is a black powder version, which is above, I shouldn't say probably, it's definitely above, that's still at the minimum 5,000 psi more than what this was intended to handle, or this one. Now, the reason why this is in pieces is because I had a friend of mine that was shooting it when shooting, as I had wrongly purchased, and wrongly thought would be okay, the 32 ACP, and it exploded in his hand. Luckily, nothing happened and no one was hurt, and it just broke the firearm, but it's a good example in safety, and especially even when you feel like you understand something, that you need to make sure you really understand it in depthly. Because I thought, you know, even at worst, it's probably not going to do what it did. And it did what it did, and now it's broken, and now I need to fix it, and eventually you'll get a video on that. But it's just something important to remember, that even though a cartridge may be dimensionally similar, there could be other differences that you really need to consider before you just try to swap it into another firearm. Anyway, I guess I kind of preached a little bit too long on that. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and learned something about the Iver Johnson, and maybe something about these firearms in general. I kind of did also want to go over, this originally sold for, say, $6, so it really is in, say, your High Point, Lorcan, Jennings, Raven area of pricing. So you don't really expect a high level of quality or durability from the firearm. But in the same stroke, you want to be very careful about what ammunition you're putting in it, be it a black powder version, where you probably should maybe use the black powder rounds, or be it the regular Smith & Wesson short version, where you want to make sure you're using the 32 Smith & Wesson short and nothing else, because it will not handle anything else. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and if you have anything else to add in the comments, go ahead and comment below. Thanks for watching. If you watch some of my other videos and you like those too, I'd appreciate if you subscribe. Have a good day.